The rain poured heavily against the cracked window as Ethan sat alone in his tiny apartment. The room was dark except for the weak yellow light hanging above his table. Bills were scattered everywhere. His phone lay silent beside him. No messages, no calls, no one checking if he was okay. 3 months earlier, he had lost everything he believed defined his life. First came the breakup. The woman he planned to marry looked him in the eyes and said, "I don't think I love you anymore." Those words shattered him more deeply than he admitted. Then he lost his job at the construction company where he had worked for 6 years. The manager apologized, blaming budget cuts, but Ethan heard only one thing: "You are no longer needed." The pain kept growing. His closest friends slowly disappeared. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations became shorter. Even church felt different. People smiled politely, but nobody noticed the storm raging inside him. Ethan began asking God questions he had never dared ask before. Why are you taking everything away from me? Why does it feel like you abandoned me? Why does every door keep closing? Night after night, silence answered him. One evening, exhausted and broken, Ethan fell asleep at the kitchen table with his Bible open beside him. Rain tapped softly against the glass while thunder rolled in the distance. Then he dreamed. He stood in the middle of a massive forest. Thick fog surrounded him, trees stretched endlessly in every direction. Somewhere ahead he heard rushing water. A voice called his name. Ethan. He turned but saw no one. Again the voice came, calm and powerful. Keep walking. Though afraid, Ethan obeyed. Branches scraped his arms as he moved deeper into the forest. The sound of water grew louder until suddenly he reached the edge of a cliff. Below him, violent waves crashed against black rocks. One more step and he would have fallen to his death. His heart pounded. Then the voice spoke again. You thought you were being rejected, but I was rescuing you. Ethan woke up gasping for breath. The room was silent, but something inside him had shifted. For the first time in months he cried, not from despair but from release. Still, understanding didn't come overnight. The next weeks remained difficult. He struggled to pay rent. Some mornings he barely found the strength to leave bed, but the dream stayed in his mind. You were not rejected. You were rescued. One afternoon, Ethan visited his old workplace to collect a final document. While speaking with a former coworker, he learned shocking news. The company was under investigation for corruption and illegal contracts. Several supervisors had been arrested. Employees who remained there were now facing lawsuits and unpaid salaries. Ethan stood frozen. Had he stayed, his life could have been destroyed alongside theirs. Driving home, his hands trembled on the steering wheel. For the first time, he wondered if losing the job had actually saved him. But life continued testing him. Weeks later, he accidentally saw photos online of his ex-fiancée with another man. The pain reopened instantly. Anger burned inside him. That night he walked through the empty streets trying to escape the crushing weight in his chest. God, he whispered bitterly, how is this rescue? The wind blew cold around him. Then his phone rang. It was Marcus, an older man from church Ethan barely knew. I don't know why, Marcus said, but I felt God telling me to check on you. Ethan almost ignored the call, but something made him answer honestly. I'm not okay. Marcus invited him over immediately. When Ethan arrived, Marcus listened without interrupting. After hours of talking, Marcus finally said something Ethan would never forget. Sometimes God removes people because he sees what we cannot. Ethan looked down silently. Marcus continued. If someone walks away from you, it doesn't always mean you lost something valuable. Sometimes it means God protected you from pain you haven't seen yet. Those words echoed deeply. Months passed. Ethan slowly rebuilt his life. He found temporary work repairing homes after storms. The pay was small, but he enjoyed helping people. He began praying again, not polished prayers, but honest ones. One morning, while repairing an elderly woman's roof, Ethan noticed her struggling to carry groceries. He helped her inside. The woman smiled warmly. You remind me of my grandson. Her name was Margaret. She lived alone after losing her husband years earlier. Ethan started visiting weekly to help with repairs and chores. Over time, Margaret became like family. One evening while sharing dinner, she asked him a simple question. What if your closed doors were actually walls protecting you from destruction? Ethan sat quietly. Why did everyone keep saying the same thing? That night he opened his Bible again for the first time in months. His eyes fell upon a verse. God's plans are to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you hope and a future. He stared at the words for a long time. Maybe God had never abandoned him. Maybe God had been guiding him through pain he didn't yet understand. But the greatest lesson came unexpectedly. One rainy afternoon, Ethan received a message from an unknown number. It was his ex-fiancée. I need to talk. They met at a quiet coffee shop downtown. She looked exhausted. After awkward silence, she confessed everything. The man she left Ethan for had become controlling and abusive. Their relationship collapsed quickly. She admitted she had been chasing excitement instead of loyalty. Tears filled her eyes. I hurt you, she whispered. I'm sorry. Ethan listened carefully. Months earlier, this conversation would have destroyed him. But now, strangely, he felt peace. Because for the first time, he realized something important. If she had stayed, he would have spent his life trying to hold together something already broken. God had not stolen love from him. God had spared him from deeper heartbreak later. As Ethan walked out of the cafe into the rain, he looked toward the gray sky. Thank you, he whispered. Not because the pain hadn't been real, but because now he understood. Rescue rarely feels comfortable. Sometimes rescue looks like closed doors. Sometimes it feels like loneliness. Sometimes it sounds like silence. And sometimes rescue breaks your heart before it saves your soul. A year later, Ethan's life looked completely different. He had started his own small repair business. It wasn't huge, but it was growing steadily. He worked honestly and treated people with kindness. More importantly, he had changed inside. The bitterness was gone. One Sunday after church, Marcus introduced Ethan to a woman named Hannah. She had gentle eyes and a calm spirit. Unlike his previous relationship, conversations with Hannah felt peaceful instead of exhausting. They became friends first. Slowly, friendship became something deeper. Unlike before, Ethan no longer built his identity around another person's approval. He had learned that human rejection could not cancel God's purpose. One evening, Ethan and Hannah sat beside a lake watching the sunset paint the sky orange and gold. Hannah asked softly, "What was the hardest season of your life?" Ethan smiled faintly. "The season when I thought God was destroying me." "And what do you believe now?" He looked across the quiet water. "I believe he was saving me." Years later, Ethan would tell his story to many people, not because his life became perfect. There were still struggles, still losses, still moments of confusion. But he had discovered a truth stronger than disappointment. God sees dangers we cannot. People cry over doors God closed because they cannot yet see the disaster waiting behind them. A lost relationship may protect your future. A failed opportunity may save your peace. A painful ending may become the beginning of your healing. One winter evening, Ethan visited the old forest trail near the cliffs from his dream. Snow covered the ground softly. The air was cold and still. Standing near the edge, he looked down at the crashing waves far below. Then tears filled his eyes again, because now he understood the dream completely. If God had not interrupted his plans, if God had not allowed heartbreak, if God had not closed doors, he might have walked straight into destruction without realizing it. The cliff had looked like opportunity, but it was danger. The rejection had felt cruel, but it was mercy. The loneliness had felt like abandonment, but God had been walking beside him the entire time. Ethan closed his eyes as wind swept across the cliffside. And deep within his soul, he heard the same words once more. You were not rejected. You were rescued. At that moment, peace flooded him completely. Not the fragile peace built on perfect circumstances, but the unshakable peace that comes from trusting God even when life makes no sense. Far too many people spend years mourning things God removed for their protection. They beg for relationships that would destroy them. They chase opportunities that would corrupt them. They cling to people who secretly poison their spirit. And when God intervenes, they call it punishment. But heaven sees what earth cannot. Sometimes the unanswered prayer is mercy. Sometimes the delay is protection. Sometimes the separation is divine rescue. The hardest truth to accept is this: God's protection does not always feel pleasant in the moment. A surgeon causes pain to remove disease. A storm uproots weak foundations. A fire clears dead forests so new life can grow. And sometimes God allows temporary heartbreak to prevent permanent destruction. That night Ethan returned home and opened his journal. He wrote these words carefully: "Everything I begged God to stop became part of what saved me." Then beneath it he added, "Closed doors are not always rejection. Sometimes they are rescue." Years later, after building a beautiful family with Hannah, Ethan would sit beside his young son during difficult moments and say, "Never measure God's love by how many doors stay open. Sometimes his greatest love is found in what he refuses to let you keep." His son once asked him, "How do you know when God is protecting you?" Ethan smiled gently. "Usually you don't know until much later." That's why trust matters. As the years passed, Ethan learned another lesson. Rescue is not only about what God removes, it is also about what God restores. Because after every painful ending, God slowly rebuilt Ethan stronger than before. Not overnight, not instantly, but faithfully, piece by piece. God restored his peace, his purpose, his confidence, his faith, and most importantly, his understanding. Ethan realized that rejection from people never meant rejection from God. Human opinions change constantly. People walk away. Promises break. Feelings fade. But God's plans remain steady even when life feels chaotic. One final memory stayed with Ethan forever. Shortly before Marcus passed away from illness, Ethan visited him at the hospital. Marcus looked weak but peaceful. Before Ethan left, Marcus grabbed his hand gently and said, "Never forget this truth. God removes what your heart would keep if keeping it would destroy you." Tears filled Ethan's eyes. Marcus smiled softly. "You survived because heaven intervened." After the funeral, Ethan drove alone for hours thinking about those words. Then suddenly he understood something deeper than ever before. Rescue is often invisible at first. No alarms sound. No dramatic signs appear. Life simply falls apart, and people assume God has disappeared. But sometimes heaven is working most powerfully when everything familiar collapses, because God is not only concerned with temporary happiness. He is concerned with your soul, your future, your purpose, and the unseen roads ahead. Ethan eventually stopped asking, "Why did this happen to me?" Instead, he began asking, "What was God protecting me from?" That question changed everything. The pain still mattered. The tears were still real, but now they carried meaning, and meaning transforms suffering. One spring morning, years after his darkest season, Ethan stood outside his successful business watching workers laugh together as sunlight filled the sky. Hannah walked beside him holding their daughter. Peace surrounded him in a way he once thought impossible. Then suddenly he remembered the lonely apartment, the silent phone, the crushing heartbreak, and the nights he thought God had abandoned him. He almost smiled through tears, because if every prayer from that season had been answered exactly the way he wanted, he would have lost the beautiful life standing before him now. Sometimes God says no because he sees a better yes waiting ahead. Sometimes he removes temporary comfort to deliver lasting peace. And sometimes the very thing that breaks your heart becomes the thing that saves your life. So if you are grieving closed doors, if someone walked away, if opportunities vanished, if your plans collapsed unexpectedly, do not rush to believe you were abandoned. You may be standing in the middle of a rescue you cannot yet understand. One day the fog will clear. One day the pieces will connect. One day you will look back at the pain that nearly destroyed you and realize it carried hidden mercy all along. And when that day comes, You may whisper the same words Ethan once spoke beside the cliffs.